Welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 14, Political Violence. And our topic is Forms of Political Violence. There exist different forms of political violence which people use to show their resentment and dissatisfaction against the government. It can assume a form of a violent demonstration, or it can be an epoch-making revolution like the French Revolution of 1789. We see the emergence of political violence in the following forms: violent protest by the people against the government, terrorism, military revolts and takeovers, and revolts and rebellion. The first one is violent protest by the people against the government. Normally, people take recourse to violence when all the constitutional means available to them fail. The violent protest of the people assume different forms. The violent protest of unorganized mobs cause a large-scale damage because they attack the symbols of government authority, such as government offices, railways, and buses. They try to disrupt normal functioning of the government. This type of violence is sporadic in nature and it dies down after registering protest. But due to the violent riotings, the government tend to amend their policies to avoid the spread of violence. Those groups which are well organized mobilize people against the government and use different methods of resistance. They declare strikes, bands, and hartals. Sometimes they organize violent demonstrations and morchas. If the central authority of the government is weak and it lacks legitimacy, a well organized demonstration may cause the downfall of the government. But this rarely happens. Otherwise, the impact of violent protest of the mobs is temporary in nature because the government uses repressive measures to control it. The next one is terrorism. In modern times, terrorism has become one of the important forms of political violence, as a large number of youth people join terrorist groups to bring about the change in the government. The weapon of terrorism is used by terrorists because they know that they cannot launch an open war against the state, as the state has a superior force at its command. But terrorists are determined to use violent methods because it is their opinion that opponents understand the language of the gun. Their power in society is also based on the gun. Terrorists use all sorts of methods to teach a lesson to the state authorities. Their activities start with the blowing up of a bridge or a breaching a wall of a dam. But in the process, they expand the area of their operation. They get involved in activities of sabotage, murder, killing a large number of people in sudden gunfire, hijacking of an aircraft or a bus, holding people for ransom, kidnapping, political assassinations, extortions, setting fire to places of worship and markets, inciting caste and communal rights, etc. They succeed in harassing the state authorities because there is an element of surprise in their actions. The Irish Republican Army, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, various Palestine guerrilla outfits, Al Qaeda militants are some of the most violent and dreaded terrorist organizations. In India, we have witnessed activities of terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Nagaland, Assam, Manipur, Tripura, and Mizoram. The Naga militants have been continuing their terrorist activities for the last 4 years. Through their activities, the terrorists want to establish a well trained armed wing to carry forward insurgency activities. But most of them do not succeed. It is true that some terrorist organizations succeed in setting up their own militias, but they cannot fight a well oiled regular army of modern state, which is often supported by a superpower. Guerrilla warfare succeeds when the state authorities are extremely weak and when their reach does not run beyond the capital. In South Vietnam, the Viet Cong guerrillas succeeded because of the weakness of the South Vietnamese state. Terrorists take recourse to crime, but they are not ordinary criminals because they are ideologically motivated and they have a vision of establishing a better society. Terrorist activities are legitimatized by their ideology. We can see three distinct phases of ideological orientation of terrorism. In its first phase, national independence was its goal. In the second phase, after the Second World War, most of the terrorists owed their allegiance to revolutionary socialism, and at present, their orientation is religious fundamentalism or ethnic separatism. Every terrorist movement has its own group of intellectuals who rationalize the use of violence. Our next step is military revolts and takeovers. In modern times, the military or the armed forces of the country are playing an important role in the politics of the third world countries because they are the only well organized force available in societies which have not undergone the process of state and nation buildings. Involvement of military in political violence assumes two forms: the mutiny of soldiers and military takeover or coup d'etat. All over the world, disgruntled elements in the armed forces rebel against the government. This revolt is called mutiny. Due to some economic or political reasons, the soldiers take to arms and get involved in violent activities. For example, in 1857, the Indian soldiers of the army of British East India Company revolted against the British rule and killed a large number of their British officers. Normally, a mutiny is always taken very seriously by the state authorities because soldiers possess arms and training and they are in large numbers. But if a mutiny has no ideological base, sooner or later it brought under control by the state authorities. The second form of the political violence is the military takeover by engineering a coup d'etat. Military takeover is a sharp armed insurrection by a group of army officers to capture political power by establishing control over the key installations of the state. It is a well organized operation in which masses are bypassed. If coup leaders are confident of controlling the situation, they may not take recourse to violence. For example, in Pakistan, most of the military takeovers were bloodless. But if the coup leaders are not confident of their success, they indulge in an extreme form of violence to strike terror in the mind of the people. For example, in Bangladesh in 1975, President Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his entire family was wiped out. The military coup in the Indonesia in 1965-66 was extremely violent. All military takeovers in Afghanistan after 1973 were violent. In the military takeover, the masses are not involved, and in many of the Afro-Asian and Latin American countries, the military displaces the democratic government and usurps power. Most of the dreaded dictators in these countries are military generals. Our next step is revolts and rebellions. We have seen that terrorist violence or even military revolts do not need the support of the masses. It is essentially an action carried out by a determined group of people. But revolts and rebellions take place because of popular disaffection. Revolts represent the anger of certain sections of society, and they are aimed at changing the policy of the government or change in government. The revolts may take place in different parts of the country, and the demands of the rebel may be very specific. If the revolts are accompanied by a high degree of modern revolutions, are not confined to replacing a bad ruler with a good one, but they have a modernist agenda of restructuring the entire socio political order by the legitimate representatives of the community. Now, our topic is meaning of revolution. As we have seen, revolutions are aimed at changing the basic structure of society. They want to bring about a rapid transformation of the society's state and class structures. This is accompanied and carried through by the class based revolts from below. Modern revolutions differ from the earlier revolts in the sense that the latter did not think of basic changes in society and the state, and they were more interested in change in the government. Modern revolutions had its goals clearly defined, and its leaders use violence to consummate it. Its leaders are backed by a well defined theory which seeks to legitimize revolutionary violence. Next topic is three phases of revolution. We can say that there are three distinct phases of revolution. The first phase of revolution is the classical phase. The second phase of revolution is the socialist phase, and the third phase of revolution is the revolution in the third world countries. The classical phase of revolution began in England during the British Civil War of the 17th century that destroyed royal absolutism in England. It was ruled by the French Revolution of 1789, which witnessed unprecedented violence and bloodshed. It destroyed feudalism in France and paved the way for the emergence of the modern capitalist society. The American Revolution ended foreign domination and established a modern constitutional democracy in USA. All these three revolutions transformed the state organizations, class structures, and dominant ideologies. The classical revolutions were followed by the socialist revolution of 20th century. It began with the October Revolution of 1917 in Russia. It was succeeded by the Chinese Revolution of 1949 and the Cuban Revolution in 1961. Ideologically, the leaders of these revolutions were more radical in the sense that they wanted to have a total transformation of social, economic, and political structures. Though all socialist revolutionaries believed in Marxist philosophy and Leninist politics of international proletariat revolution, they followed different methods to bring about the revolution. In the third phase, revolutions were witnessed in the third world countries. The Egyptian revolt of 1953 paved the way for the emergence of new politics in Arab countries. The Islamic Revolution of Iran in 1979 was the last of the great revolutions which tried to reorder Iranian society on the principles of the radical Islam. Our next topic is theories of revolution. There are three distinct theories of revolution. These theories probe causes, goals, and consequences of revolution and throw light on the ideology that binds adherents of the people. The first theory of revolution is expounded by Ted Robert Gurr in his book Why Men Rebel. He says that the revolution is a form of political violence and it challenges the monopoly of force possessed by the state. He is of the view that the turmoil, conspiracy, and internal war are the three features of revolution. The main cause of disaffection and rebellion is relative deprivation of the people. The more intense the deprivation, the greater is the degree of violence. He thinks that at first there is discontent of the people, then there is politicization of discontent, and finally its actualization in violent action against the state. He holds that the discontented elite play a major role in revolution organization and with the tacit approval of the wide sections of the population. One can say that they have assumed a serious form. It includes large scale terrorism and civil war. The revolt may develop into a rebellion. Rebellion is the second stage of revolt in the sense that in this phase the rebels are ideologically committed and they have developed a vision of future society. Due to the normally socialist or nationalist ideology, they are supported by a large number of people. If the rebels are able to concentrate in a geographically peripheral area or areas outside the efficient control of the state, and if foreign support is available to them, the rebellion assumes the form of armed insurrections, which cannot be easily put down. The rebels normally use the tactics of guerrilla warfare because they lack the military strength to counter state forces. To circumvent the ideology exhaustions or through the premises of redistributive policy, they promise land to the landless, regional autonomy for ethnic minorities, and political equality through the end of the foreign domination. The revolutionary guerrilla warfare succeeded in countries like China, Vietnam, and Cuba, but it failed in Greece, Philippines, and Iran. Near perfect intelligence, mobility, freedom from fixed logic bases, and surprise are the characteristics of successful guerrilla operations, but increasingly due to the strengthening of the state organization and state forces, guerrillas have not been able to achieve the success that they had achieved against weak states immediately after the Second World War. Now, the next point is war. War is the culmination of political violence in the sense that the war brings forth two contending forces face to face with each other and settles the issue on the basis of balance of armed forces. War is an old as human history, and violence and bloodshed are at the heart of it. There are two types of wars: war with the external enemy of the country, and internal war within takes place between the state forces and the rebel, which is called civil war. The external war causes widespread damage and destruction because both the parties used massive armies, modern weapons of mass destruction, and air force. The First World War accounted for 1 million deaths, and the Second World War was the most destructive of all wars. Atomic weapons were used by the USA to settle the issue. Internal war is fought between the forces of a central government and the secessionist forces. It could be a revolt by a certain sections of the people or a rebellion by the broad mass of the people. In 1860, the USA witnessed a civil war between the northern and the southern states on the issue of the abolition of slavery. Internal war is equally destructive and it may cause widespread destruction and massacres. We have examples of violent internal wars in Lebanon, Yugoslavia, Nigeria, and India. Thus, political violence assumes different forms in modern times. Revolution is also a particular form of political violence. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.